Time travel, it's one of those ideas that we're all fascinated by, right? But the moment you start digging into the how, you run into some serious puzzles. Today, we are tackling one of the most perplexing, most mind-bending of them all, the Bootstrap Paradox.
Seriously, just take a second and think about this. You hop in a time machine, go back, and hand the sheet music for the Ninth Symphony to a young Beethoven, before he's even dreamed of it. So he just copies it down, publishes it, and it becomes the masterpiece we all know, the very same music you brought back with you. So, where did it come from? Now, this isn't just some fun little riddle. This is a paradox that gets to the very core of how we think about cause, effect, and where things come from. It's called the Bootstrap Paradox, and it is a real head-scratcher.
The name actually comes from that old phrase, to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, and that's literally what seems to be happening here. An object or an idea exists, well, simply because it exists. It doesn't have a clear beginning.
Okay, so to really get our heads around this, we need to break down exactly what makes this paradox tick and how this bizarre loop actually works.
So, here's the formal definition. Sometimes it's called an ontological paradox, which is just a fancy way of saying it's about the nature of existence itself. The key thing to remember is the causal loop. This isn't about changing the past. It's about a piece of the past that just seems to have no starting point at all.
Let's walk through our main example again. A huge music fan from the future goes back in time, realizes Beethoven hasn't written his masterpieces yet, and just gives him the copies. Beethoven publishes them. They become legendary for centuries, which is what inspires our musicologists to eventually take them back in time in the first place. You see the circle? The music was never composed, it just is.
And it's not just about ideas, you know? Imagine a time traveler's machine breaks. They manage to build a new part by reverse engineering the broken one. That new part eventually becomes the very same one that breaks, which is what started the whole trip. The part was never actually invented. So, here's the really crucial distinction to make. How is this different from the more famous grandfather paradox? Well, killing your grandfather is a contradiction. It prevents you from ever being born to do it in the first place. The Bootstrap Paradox is the exact opposite. It's perfectly consistent. The loop works. Everything happens exactly as it's supposed to. The only problem is, it has no beginning.
So how could something like this even be possible? Well, physicists and philosophers have come up with a few different models of time that might, just might, allow for these bizarre loops to exist. Let's take a look at the theories.
Okay, so in the block universe theory, the past, present, and future all exist at the same time. In that view, the loop isn't a paradox. It's just a permanent, unchangeable shape in the fabric of space-time. Then you've got the many worlds theory, which says the time traveler creates a whole new universe where the music's origin is simply the other timeline. And finally, the self-consistency principle basically says you cannot change the past. So if a loop exists, it's because it was always there, a pre-written fact of history. Now, this might all sound like pure theory, but this idea has popped up all over science fiction. Once you know what to look for, I promise you'll start seeing it everywhere. The absolute classic example has to be the Terminator. The evil AI Skynet is developed from the advanced tech found in the wreckage of the first Terminator, a machine that Skynet itself sent back from the future. Skynet's creation depends on its own future existing. That's a perfect loop. Oh, and any Doctor Who fans out there will know this one very well. The Doctor is always getting tangled up in these kinds of loops, receiving some message that guides their actions, only to realize later that, yep, they were the one who sent the message to themselves in the first place. And if you want a truly mind-bending, absolutely wild literary example, Robert Heinlein's short story, All You Zombies, takes this to the extreme. Through a series of insane time travel loops, the main character ends up becoming their own biological mother and father, a person who literally bootstrapped themselves into existence. So, what do we do with all this? The paradox doesn't really give us a simple solution. What it does instead is force us to face some very deep and frankly uncomfortable questions about reality itself. The challenges here are huge. Can something just be without a beginning? It messes with our whole idea of knowledge because we usually understand things by tracing them back to their source. And what about free will? If you're part of one of these loops, are you really making choices or just playing a part that's already written? And seriously, who gets the copyright for Beethoven's Fifth? This quote really helps reframe the whole problem. Maybe it only feels like a paradox because we're using the wrong kind of logic. Our brains are wired for a linear, cause and effect world, asking, who was first inside a closed loop is like asking what's north of the North Pole. The question itself doesn't really make sense in that context.
And that leaves us with a final, pretty unsettling thought. We assume everything needs a creator, a point of origin to be real. But what if it doesn't? If Beethoven's music exists in a perfect, self-sustaining loop without a composer, is it any less magnificent? Does an object having no origin make it any less real? That is the Bootstrap Paradox.